Well, good evening and welcome to our midweek Lenten study or midweek Lenten service, a little reflection for Wednesdays. And so what I want to share with you is a scripture passage for tonight as we dive into finding Jesus at the table. And so our first story actually comes out of John chapter 2, beginning at verse 1. And it's the story of that wedding at Cana. And so here is the story. On the third day, a wedding took place in Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jar with water." And so they filled him to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out their choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. So as we begin our midweek Lenten journey of finding Jesus at the table, I want to ask you a couple of questions. First, have you been able to reflect on an area of your life where you are being called to sacrifice something during this season so that you are able to focus more on your relationship with Jesus Christ? Is there something you are giving up? Or is there something that you are adding to your spiritual walk to help you focus on Jesus in this particular Lenten season? And second, how are your 15 minutes going? Are you setting aside at least 15 minutes a day to spend alone with God? This can be in prayer, study, meditation, or just in silence. How are your 15 minutes going? It's not too late. You can start them any day. Well, welcome to our midweek Lenten worship time. Many are gathered around tables enjoying soup and conversations, while others, like you, are gathering around the dinner tables with family, friends, or by themselves as you worship online. During our Wednesday evenings, we will be focusing on the stories in the Gospels where we find Jesus at a table. This might be while he is eating, multiplying food, or just engaged in conversations around the table. Either way, we'll search for Jesus, what he's doing, what he's teaching in those moments. Our first story is the first feast. It's a wedding celebration in Cana. Yes, here is where Jesus performs his first miracle, or as John would call it, a sign. Jesus takes everyday water and turns it into the best wine. But like many other biblical stories, there is far more than meets the eye. So let's dive in, shall we? Let's set the stage and quickly examine 3 key elements of this story: weddings, wine, and those large, curious stone water jars. When we think of a wedding day, we normally think about a ceremony, usually in the afternoon, followed by an inordinate amount of time taking pictures. Then finally, we end up at a feast, the wedding reception. This is where the party takes over and we find food, wine, conversations, and dancing. However, in the ancient Near East, we find a cultural meaning that is far deeper than what we experience today. The bride and groom, both from the community, are joined together, and they're joining together 2 families, as well as beginning deep roots within the community. Everyone is invited to the celebration. By the way, this is not just a one-day or night event. Wedding celebrations in the Jewish culture lasted for a week. It was one of the few extravagant events in the life of those communities. And since everyone is invited to this event, there would be huge social implications if it turned out to be a bad celebration. Like if the party would have run out of wine. Well, speaking of wine, this would not be viewed as the same today. Although it was used in celebrations like a wedding and seen as a symbol of joy, it was also a commonplace drink. Around this time, it would have been considered safer to drink than just purely water. But then we have these large stone water jars, which were placed on the site at the wedding. What are they? Why are they there? Well, first, if water was placed in earthen jars, like pottery, it is believed that the purity of the water would be retained. The jars had to be stone. The water that was placed within was used for purification purposes. This water would be used to wash the feet of the people as they arrived to the wedding celebration. It was also used to wash the people's hands multiple times. They would wash as they arrived, before the meal, and even in between courses. These were water purification jars. And that is important to understand the story. Then the unthinkable happens. There's no more wine. It's all gone. What do we do now? The social disgrace is coming, even if the bride and groom don't know anything about it yet. However, Mary hears about the coming tragedy and is worried. But why would she be? Why would Mary be worried about this? We get a glimpse of this as she is able to order the servants around. Mary has a position of authority at this celebration. We don't know exactly why, because it was never told to us as to who the bride and groom were. But Mary is connected in some way. So she turns to Jesus because she knows who he is and realizes that he just might have the power to do something about this situation. She tells him that they are out of wine. Notice that she does not tell him what to do. She just gives him the current situation. She will let him determine what to do. She kind of tells him like she is his mother. Hey, Jesus, the wine's gone. And Jesus' response might be interpreted as a son who doesn't want to be bothered. What's that got to do with me, Mom? I'm not in charge of this party. It reminds her that his time has not come. Maybe it's a very early forecast into the final wedding feast when Jesus will be the bridegroom and the wedding celebration will focus on him. Nevertheless, Mary shows her deep faith in her son, who she knows is the Son of God. She turns to Jesus when things go wrong. She's showing us what we can do in situations like this. When things don't go the way we hope they would, we can also turn to Jesus. As I said earlier, Mary didn't tell Jesus what to do. In fact, she might not have known what he would do, but she trusted him. She trusted that whatever his plan was, it would be a good one. She demonstrates this trust as she turns to the servers and tells them to do whatever Jesus asked them to do. Again, Mary had authority at the celebration and now passes that authority to Jesus for him to do as he pleases. I can only assume that the servers didn't really know who this Jesus was at the time either. It was pretty close to the beginning of his ministry, and the people wouldn't have seen or heard much of his teachings yet. So let's turn our focus to the servants for just a moment. The servers would be responsible to the master of the feast, and this master of the feast would be the bridegroom. This was their boss. Here they are, going about their business of serving all the guests, making sure the food was served and ready, refilling glasses of wine when they realize the worst thing has happened. The wine is gone. What do they do now? Do they run and tell the bridegroom? This will surely bring shame to his family and be a disgrace to all the celebration, they are in a tight space. But then Mary comes to them and tells them that she understands what has happened and that she has a plan. Great. What is it? Listen to this man. Really? That's all you got, Mary? Why should we listen to him? Who is he anyway? And here is where I see a bit of prevenient grace being demonstrated. You see, the servers had no history with Jesus. They didn't know who he was, had probably never heard any of his teachings, but yet they listened to him. They did exactly what was asked of them. They had faith in what Jesus could do, even if they hadn't seen anything yet. They were about to. Jesus tells them to fill the stone water jars. Obviously, they've been used throughout the first days of the celebration, and therefore were partially empty. But this also proves that there weren't 6 stone jars of wine just waiting for this occasion. The servers might have been questioning why they needed to fill the jars. But I think there are many times when we are skeptical about something we are asked to do. We don't see the whole picture. We don't grasp God's complete plan. Therefore, we refuse to fill the jars. We refuse to do the small things until we know why we are being asked to do them. The servants remind us that there are times when we need to just listen and obey. My grandfather was a cement contractor, and while many of the projects were flat work, and flat work was kind of pouring cement slabs for basement floors, driveways, and patios, some of the projects called for pouring foundations. And when you pour a foundation, you are laying the groundwork for all the building that will go above it. There are many passages in Scripture that talk about building on a strong foundation. Probably none more so than the story of the man building a house on the sand. You might remember that story. But the interesting thing about a foundation is that once it's poured, you might not ever see it. But again, it is necessary, even if the person doing it never sees the finished product. Well, the servants fill up the jars and brought them back to Jesus, still not knowing what is going to happen. Understand that from our story, we don't have Jesus speaking any words over the water. He's not waving his hands above them or even saying a prayer over the jars. Jesus simply tells the servant to take some out of the jar and give it to the master of the feast. In this moment, the water miraculously transforms into wine. The change happens within the jar, but it's not seen until it's drawn out of the jar. It's an inward change that witnesses when it is exposed to the world around it and is experienced by others. Our lives are also changed and transformed by Jesus from the inside out. And we witness to our change when we share the love of God with those around us. But here's where the story gets really interesting. Jesus tells the servants to take some out of the jar and give it to the master of the feast. As I said before, they had just filled these jars up with water. They saw the water go into the jar. Jesus doesn't say or do anything to the jar, just simply tells them now to take some out and take it to the master. And here comes a test of the faith of these servants. They knew where the water came from. They could have only assumed that the same water came out. And yet they still gave a glass to the master of the feast. What was going to happen to them when the master tasted the water? Would they have been fired? Humiliated in front of the whole crowd? I mean, could you imagine what they might have been feeling at that moment? Can you put yourself maybe in their sandals, taking that glass to the master of the feast? Is God asking you to do things that don't make a little sense to you? Are you refusing to take the wine out of the jar until you can see the bigger picture? Or can you rest in the faith like the servants, and just do as God is asking, trusting that God's plan is far greater than your plan? What is God asking you to do today? Where is God leading you? And are you willing to go where God leads? While this first story of Jesus at the table focuses on an extravagant event, a wedding celebration, the story is really about extravagant faith. Do we have the extravagant faith that is required to do anything for the true master of the feast, Jesus Christ? May you have a truly blessed Lenten season as we continue on this season of reflection, as we continue on this season of remembrance. Have a wonderful and blessed evening tonight.